Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known in this realm as Jaime and Fuego, and welcome to another edition of my weekly Sunday program that I so affectionately call Hail to Stephen King. Damn Rizzle, guys. Gracias very, very much for joining me. And, you know, after last week's episode essentially was the longest that I had ever done for this program, and it was a just kind of last little bit talking about it, looking forward to Chapter 2, talking about casting choices that I would like to see for the Adult Losers Club. We talked about how it crushed at the box office. It's like the most profitable September movie like ever at this point, only dropped 50%. And it's still making tons of money. It's at over $200 million for just the US alone in 10 days. It's crazy the phenomenon which is transpiring here. I'm very excited for once we get more details about that. However, there are a few other times where we actually got to return and encounter a couple of those characters in the Losers Club that we loved so much in Derry. And so this is essentially going to be me discussing the two main books that have connections where we have legitimate lengthy bits of story told in Derry. Now I know that there's lots of Derry connections, and it was mentioned there's allusions to it in the Tommyknockers talking about clowns in the sewer. There's oh goodness, what else? Duddits is saved in Dreamcatcher, and by that gang of boys, in the it's like the depot where there was like a baseball field behind and stuff. It's where Richie, when he comes back in the 80s, re-encounters, I should say, Pennywise for the first time. And so there's connections here and there in different Stephen King books to Derry, or just references to the town or whatever. I think Bag of Bones is another one. There's lots of short story references and whatnot, The Body for one. But these are the two books that really, they had actual large chunks of story were told there. Now, I'm just going to briefly talk about 11/22/63 first, because of the fact that only a portion of that book actually takes place there. And so for the miniseries, they pretty much took the beats that happened in Derry with Jake Epping, and they just moved them into Jody. And so they just kind of mushed a lot of that stuff together. Did they move it to Jody? Boy, I cannot remember, because it's been a minute since I've read that. But I do remember very specifically that Jake, one of the first reasons why he wants to go back and kind of test out his time travel stuff. And also, if you guys haven't seen the Franco miniseries, it's actually pretty damn good, despite Bill the Foil and some of the storytelling elements that they had to change, because they couldn't just have everything be him for going after Oswald and stuff, or maybe they could have. That's an arguable point. But in the book itself, he has this elderly student. He's not elderly, but he's kind of handicapped a bit, and not well-to-do, and he's somebody trying to graduate high school, and he's like in his 40s, 50s. He's an older guy, much, much older, and he reads this paper before the class, that kind of a report story type thing about this horrible, murderous thing that his father did. And so it happened in Derry. And so Jake decides, okay, well, you know what? First thing that I'm going to do to kind of test out this time travel stuff, because the story it's entitled 11/22/63. It's about a guy trying to avert the assassination of JFK. But when he's kind of testing out the time travel aspect, initially when he finds this portal in this diner, he's like, I'm going to go and try to stop this horrible thing that happened to this older student of mine. This guy who was obviously scarred for life because of this situation that went down. And so goes and lives in Derry, and it's at 58, if I'm not mistaken. So it's only like a couple years after the entire thing has been averted. And the two characters that we encounter happen to be Bevy by the Levy. That's right, Miss Beverly Marsh. And we also encounter Richie Trashmouth Tozer in this, man. And it's only one particular scene where Jake encounters them. They're just kind of like dancing around to a jazz record in the park, and it's super, super cute. But the entire time that Jake is in Derry, he makes constant references to just the lingering, just kind of weird residual evil, that he just kind of feels there, and the strangeness of the town and everything like that. So that was, it's only a few hundred pages, and he actually goes back and forth to Derry, from 2011 back to 58 Derry a few times. And so He's just trying to kind of get it right. It's very Back to the Future, where he changes one thing and then in turn it changes another thing once he gets back to what was the present when the book initially came out. So if you guys want a very touching, cute scene where Richie is trying to dance, you know, jazz around, and they've got their battery-powered record player there, and Jake actually steps in and kind of shows Richie some moves and stuff, and it's really cute. It's such a wonderful bit in the book, and just all the stuff in Derry for anybody who is a fan of Stephen King. It's pretty cool, it's pretty intriguing, but I need at some point to do a proper review of 1122. Marcia and I were actually supposed to do one at one point when we were finishing the miniseries, because I reviewed the miniseries on my old channel in Fuego-tainment, episode by episode with Cecil and Marcia. I still really liked it. I think they did a pretty damn good job. So the reason that I'm talking about Insomnia second is because of the fact that the entirety of Insomnia takes place in Derry. And not only does it take place in Derry, but unlike flashing back to the 50s, which was in between the two cycles that involve the Losers Club, Insomnia takes place years after the catastrophic flood that destroyed a good portion of the city, years after Pennywise, the eternal evil devourer of worlds, was presumably finally vanquished. Although, I guess we have kind of past that cycle, or we're at that cycle kind of right now, if you want to go by movie time wise. But so Insomnia is a mid-90s novel that Stevie K did, and finding Derry for the first time years after everything went down in the adult Losers timeline, it's just funny because Ralph Roberts is the protagonist in this, and he's an elderly man who's unfortunately lost his wife, and the title of the book comes from the fact that his grief has caused him to start losing sleep, and over time, since losing his wife, he's having less and less and less sleep, and in turn, he gets to the point of like hallucination and almost seeing a different astral plane of craziness. We'll get into that, but the interesting way that they describe Derry in this is that even though the town has been built back up, and it's actually, it's not just a town at this point, it's like a full-blown city, you know, and the population has skyrocketed, so they bounce back, you know, but there is still, once again, like I said, lingering residual evil. It's almost like the influence that it had for, you know, centuries and centuries and centuries, that's never going to completely go away. People are still going to be weird and have a standoffishness, and there's going to still be a high probability for just evil behavior and for things going overlooked and whatnot. So it's interesting the way that they describe that, and I'm almost done finishing rereading Insomnia right now, and this is actually a book that's also interesting because it what's the word that I'm looking for? It injects for the first time, and almost like, I think it introduces, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, pretty sure, the Crimson King, who becomes such a big antagonist of the later versions of the Dark Tower, later installments and stuff like that, and I'm pretty positive, I don't want to say I'm 100%, because it's only, pardon me, it's only my first time rereading it, but I'm pretty sure that this was our introduction to the idea of the Crimson King, and so it's a tough read for people who haven't read the Dark Tower books, I guess, especially the later installments, but it's a much cooler read for me jumping back to it after having read the Dark Tower books. The first time I read Insomnia, I just read it because I had recently read it for the first time, and so I was like, oh, it's the other book that has like the entirety of it take place in Derry. Damn right, I gotta read this. This sounds awesome, and it's not one of my favorite Stephen King books. Let's put it that way. Just because it's set in Derry doesn't mean it's great, and I mean, besides a Ben Hanscom reference that he designed the Civic Center, where a big kind of showdown takes place near the end of the book, we get a little Mike Hanlon. We realize that after the storm, the children's library and the adult library are now two separate structures, and Mike Hanlon is still running stuff there, so we get just like a scene with him, and it's weird because the way King writes him, it doesn't really feel as much like the Mike Hanlon from the It book, you know, but then again, he's really only there for like part of a chapter, and then there's a few other references. But so that's the only other losers character that we have been able to re-encounter. You know, so we had Bevy and we had Trashmouth in 1122 in that bit that I mentioned, and then we get some Mike Hanlon in this. But being the story that takes place entirely in Derry, I think that my hopes were just too high. You know, you really feel for Ralph Roberts. It's intriguing when he starts to trip out and essentially start to see, like, balloons almost, like when he's had none of the sleep and the hallucinations begin. It's almost like a lifeline, and then you start to learn about the random and the purpose and how certain people are, you know, just, what is the word? They're almost like, not so much merchants of it, but, you know, there are those that help to make sure things stay in its proper order in the way that things are kind of intended. And then the random is the kind of people that can mess up stuff on multiple levels of the tower and just have reverberating effects by just going rogue and doing insane things that are just going to have an impact far beyond that particular Stephen King universe, you know, because he's got this whole multiverse thing where there's multiple dimensions and realities and all this other stuff. And so this book, for a lot of people unfamiliar, it's a good one to go back to. Like I said, after you familiarize yourself with the Dark Tower mythology, it's a cool one to go back to, because I feel like King developed so many ideas about that appear in the later Dark Tower books here. And so it kind of goes over your head. It's kind of confusing. It's also a book that deals, and there's a cute love story that Ralph Roberts, the protagonist, has with another recent widowee. It's a woman that he's been friends with for a while. Him and his roommate, but well, not his roommate, the guy who lives below him. But there's also a character that is being kind of controlled by the Crimson King almost, and is going to go cause some crazy havoc at this like pro-abortion rally. It's very early 90s-ish in the fact that there's a conflict that's going on in the town between pro-abortion and anti-abortion people. And so this was at the time in American history where there were like extreme Christians going and bombing abortion clinics and just acting totally wild and nuts. And they bring a lot of that conflict here into the book. And so besides all the stuff that Ralph is going through with starting to see things, you know, from lifelines, like I said, to people's auras and weird little doctors that nobody else can, that go around with scissors snipping people's lifelines, and it's weird stuff, man. And it's also after King had got sober, and so I feel like he was kind of trying to stretch himself for fantastical ideas in some ways and shape and form. But yeah, so contrast this old man's insomnia with the fact that there is all this tension in the town because this women's rights leader is going to come and speak at the Civic Center, and there's all this worry that this guy who has kind of gone rogue, so to speak, and is being almost controlled by, you know, Crimson King-y types. It's a weird book, man. It's really weird, and and it's also a monster of a book. It's almost 800 pages, and so yeah, just looking back at Insomnia, it's not without its merits. Okay, it's still pretty damn good, but it's not one of my favorites. It's interesting because a character that shows up in the 7th Dark Tower book and plays kind of a crucial role in the finishing off of the Crimson King, or at least the final battle with the Crimson King, without spoiling too much stuff, he appears in a much younger, I guess, state here. And it's a kid named Patrick Danville. If anybody who's read the series, you obviously know Danville was a kid, at least in this. And so that also ties with why the Crimson King wants to have this dude going rogue, do something. It's a layered book. It's very complex, but I feel like it was a little overbaked, and I feel like King he's admitted it a few times, and then he's backtracked, and then I don't know, I guess it's one of those books that the verdict is out in some ways on, but it's, once again, the burden of expectation, as we say here on the Horror Show all too often. The fact that I had just read it, and then I jump into this book expecting, and that was another reason why I was so stoked about Dreamcatcher, is the fact that I thought more of it was going to take place in Derry. I thought there was going to be more flashbacks to when these kids were, you know, like hanging around there and doing stuff. And you know, Dreamcatcher was actually in a lot of ways, at least as far as the early bits of it before they got into the stupid alien stuff and Kurtz and all. I've gone on record and said that Dreamcatcher is like one of my 2 least favorite Stephen King books like ever, and that's because it was trying so hard to be something. And once again, they mentioned Derry in the little flap of the novel, and so I was expecting a lot more for that one too. But the less said about Dreamcatcher, the better. So for a little bit in Derry Maine, amazing job for 11/22/63, but it's not the basis of the book, and it's not even a predominant chunk, but it's some very interesting beats in the book and a few hundred pages of awesome 50s nostalgia and whatnot, and getting to see Richie and Bevy is great. But with as little as we got from Mike Hanlon, the scene with him in Insomnia doesn't really do much for me the way that the one did in 11/22. And so just Insomnia as a whole, just to kind of cap off the review, it's sad in the end. It's very layered and interesting for, you know, people along the path of the beam to the tower, man. But it's not one of Stephen King's best. It's not one of his worst, but it's just, for as ambitious as it tried to be, I feel like in some ways it kind of failed. So, yeah, but hey, worth reading. And if you like, you know, just little references to, you know, the Barons and the Kissing Bridge and all these different things, it's in there. You know, so if you want to return to Derry and, you know, be your own judge and make up your own mind, I don't know if I would highly recommend Insomnia. I can't, at least in good faith, but I can at least say that for somebody who wants to devour more Derry stuff, fair extension, even though it just mentions that, you know, the guy he's either in Derry about to fly out, or that's one that I haven't read in a minute. It's been at least a year or so, but that's in Full Dark No Stars, and that's about this guy who has like a terminal health condition, and he basically like makes a deal with the devil, a guy who may or may not be like a Randall Flagg of sorts. You be the judge of that. That's actually, honestly, I can't recommend Full Dark No Stars enough. That is a fantastic set of 4 novellas. Damn good. But as far as what is the basis of this, you know, little discussion here on Hail to Stephen King, it's a shorter one this week. You know, we kind of exhausted ourselves with King coverage because of all the It stuff, between the comic review that we did of the fan comic, the You'll Float Let's Play that we did, which was the VR thing, rewatching the miniseries, rereading the book, doing reviews for both of those, doing regulars review for the film after the premiere, spoilers review. It's just like, I'm kind of all derried out at this point, and that's why I'm nearing the end of this. So the big showdown at the Civic Center is about to take place, and my progress has slowed. I'm honestly really excited to finish this and start rereading Gerald's Game, because that is actually what we're going to be discussing on the following week's Hail to Stephen King. So next week, look forward to a talk about Gerald's Game, and the fact that on September 29th, that is when Netflix is going to be debuting that movie, which, man, Mike Flanagan, from what the trailer appears to be that I saw, Carla Gugino is going to have Gugino. Cecil got on my ass for my mispronunciation. I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. I was saying Gugino. I'm probably incorrect. Being in Arizona, I don't know those. It's a very Italian name from what I can see. But that movie looks tremendous. It's going to be on Netflix on the 29th of September. Like I said, which, ironically enough and excitingly enough for me, it's the same day that I am going to be seeing Stephen King just outside of Chicago. It is going to be amazing. I cannot recall the name offhand of the college that he's going to be at, but it's like the college bookstore, and I'm going to be making my pilgrimage out to see the King, as I'm calling it. I'm going to document the entire process here for Hail to Stephen King, and hopefully, if there is anybody who watches this program that is going to be at that particular Q&A and bit that he is doing with his son Owen for Sleeping Beauties, hopefully we'll run into each other. I will have camera in tow, and I'm going to be, documenting the entire process, as I said. So I'm incredibly excited. So this shorter edition of Hail to Stephen King, I got to extend a grande gracias to all of the peeps who have tuned into this here on The Horror Show. I have been Jaime and Fuego. You can find me on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, just at Jaime and Fuego. The YouTube is going to be changing over very soon to a full-on Infuegotainment YouTube for a relaunch, so stay tuned for more details about that. So until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, sin amigos, hasta luego. I hope that it is sooner rather than later, and until that time comes, my friends, stay scared and read Stephen King. I sure have. Damn.